Welcome to the Bikini Things podcast, where we talk everything from fitness and mental health to competing and living a healthy lifestyle. I'm your host, IFBBPro, Laura Morche, here with my co-host, IFBBPro, Sammy Joe. And we're so excited that you're here with us. So let's get started. How are you, Sammy?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm a little stuffy today.
It's literally going around, I swear.
Yeah, I feel like in the month of November, October, I've been sick so many times from show weekends. Like I'll get a little low on sleep or something, and then all of a sudden I'm sick.
Yeah,
So,
that literally happened to me coming home from Fort Lauderdale. I
oh
literally
yeah,
got
from the
that
show.
post-show sickness, and then Chris ended up getting it. Now he has a man cold. So that's been
So
fun.
you're on nurse duty then?
Yeah. So
Yeah,
it's been, if
nice.
anybody knows, if you know, you know.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Crazy.
So I'm excited for us to record this episode. This is actually a re-recording of our PED episode. We had some audio issues and we just felt like the quality is not what we would want to put out. So we're going to redo it. Take number 2.
Let's go.
Yeah. So this is about 2 weeks ago, we put out question boxes on our stories on the Bikini Things Instagram story to collect listener questions about PEDs. So this is not intended to necessarily be a lecture or a presentation. This is just literally addressing the questions that we got from you, the listeners. So we're going to go through them. Before we do that, Sammy, like, how's your Thanksgiving? How are you doing? I feel like it's been a minute because we recorded that one technically before Thanksgiving the first time.
Yeah. So Thanksgiving was good, very low key. My sister had work, so her husband and my nephews came over. We just did something super little at the house. The kids got picked up by their mom in the afternoon. We literally just binge watched a show. Also, side note, if you have any free time in your life, Silo on Apple TV is a great, great show. 10 out of 10. So
Nice.
we literally binge watched it in like 2 days, and we aren't TV watchers. Like, we don't normally have time, but with the holidays, we had a little free time. 100% recommend.
Mhm.
I overall am feeling really good. I am going to honestly say, because I always said that I'd be very transparent and slightly mad at myself for it, did not nail my reverse. So there we are with that.
Well,
I
let's talk
definitely,
about this, Sammy. Let's talk about this because here's the thing. You're only like 1.5 weeks post show.
right. So I'm going on.
You're not done reversing.
Yes. So I'm on week 3. So in the last 2.5 weeks, I did not nail it. However, I was going to say, I caught myself, or I'm catching myself in the process of catching myself and getting back on track. So I have been super transparent with my coach about it. Chris and I have been talking about it and like putting things in place for me to get back on track, especially because like getting my hormones in line and just making sure that everything like is running properly is super, super important to me right now. So I kind of caught myself slipping, and then we're in the process of getting back on track. So message, it's not too late to get back on track, as long as I've identified where I went wrong, quote unquote. And then I'm just kind of, fixing the habits that haven't been 100% in the last couple weeks. So I will say, though, that I am so happy with how the last 2 weeks have been. Like, I have felt so just normal. Not that I didn't feel normal in prep, but like I've been able to do things, right? Like, we literally went out, we picked the kids up from school the other day and like went and grabbed lunch. And like we all ate together. Like, it's just like those little things that like have been bringing me so much peace and happiness that like, even though I haven't nailed my reverse 100%, like I am just so happy and in a good place mentally that I'm like, you know what? I don't even care how the last 2 weeks went. I just know that moving forward, I need to do better. But like, it's just been so good.
Good. Good. I'm glad to hear that, Sammy. And the thing is, with reversing, because I was actually chatting with a client who competed recently about this. And, even if we don't have like a perfect week or the first couple weeks are not perfect, there's nothing we can't come back from with our bodies. Like when we're in this process, like if we realize, oh, maybe I overdid it a little, we can always course correct. Like it's not, nothing is set in stone. You're still fairly fresh off the stage. And, if we have a week or two in the reverse where we're not like, I'm not nailing my meals or my macros, or maybe I'm adding a little too much extra stuff, you can always bounce back from that. Like it's not done till it's done is the way I think of it, especially like that fresh off the stage. And you're also slightly taller, Sammy. So the one nice thing about being a slightly taller bikini athlete is that when you're in your off season or when you do have more body fat on you, you can have more of it than somebody who's short. We're physically bigger people. It spreads out more. It doesn't look the same on us. Like 10 pounds on us doesn't look the same as 10 pounds on somebody who's 4'11".
Exactly.
So it's different.
Yeah.
Yeah. So cool.
So it's been exciting.
Well, I'm excited for us to hopefully catch up more, hang out a little bit during the holidays and stuff too, because you're right. I mean, you prepped basically the whole year. So even just having those experiences of being able to go to a restaurant and eat a normal meal with everyone is like stuff that you've been missing out on. Not that you haven't been with them, but it's like, it's different when you can't participate the same way they are. So just, and it's like the holiday season too. So I imagine it's just like very, I don't know, just nice.
Yeah, for sure. How was your Thanksgiving?
It was good. I went to Austin for a few days to see my family. So that was cool. My mom's family, my uncles, aunts live there. My cousin grew up there. So she's in Dallas. But the last 2 years, we've all gone to Austin. So it was nice. It was good. So yeah, just back into it. I'm excited for the holidays as well. I need to put up my Christmas tree. I'll probably do that this weekend. Your little mini Christmas tree in the background is giving me envy. So yeah, it was good. I'm super excited for the holidays.
That's awesome. Me too. And then we'll definitely have to plan our work date soon.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. And we've got some ideas and things for upgraded setups and whatnot for bikini things next year. We want to constantly improve everything. So a lot of what we'll be doing is about that. But to jump into today's topic and the Q&A on PEDs that we received, I think, Sammy, should we just go in order again like we did last time of
I think that works perfect.
Okay. Yeah. So we'll kind of just go in order. I tried to group the questions in a way where they sort of make sense. So the first few are sort of more talking about specific things. So like the first one, just jumping right in, is do certain PEDs and amount taken vary bikini to wellness? And I guess we should preface this too. So first of all, this is not medical advice. This is information for the purposes of entertainment. And, any real questions or care or guidance should be done under the supervision of a doctor. Be smart. Don't do anything illegal, and just be really smart with your health in general. To just kind of, and I would also preface this too with like Sammy and I started our journey as natural athletes, and bikini is still a division where you can do well naturally. It takes more time. And yeah, so we're just kind of gonna share a little more, kind of pull the curtain back, so to speak, and provide info, because at the end of the day, I think our objective here is really just harm reduction and providing good info for fellow women in this sport. And I know that when I started, we didn't have the amount of info on YouTube, Instagram, etc. And even though we have more now, it can be confusing. And I wish I had someone to explain more of these things to me when I started.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, like what we're talking about also is just a very small sliver of it based on the questions and things like that we had people ask. And then all of this is just coming from our own research and our own knowledge. And like I can even say, and then based on the last recording we did, I was quiet a lot of the time because I don't have much knowledge in it. Like I've done my own personal research, but in the grand scheme of it, because it's talked so highly, everybody thinks it's what everybody's doing and it's the only way to do it, right? So we're not saying that is the case. We're just, again, like Laura said, providing information based on the questions that were given to us.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, Sammy, you're still a relatively new competitor, relatively new coach. So it's totally normal that you're learning and your knowledge and all of that. So yeah, we just want to really provide you ladies some good info, answer the questions we had. So the first one was touching on, do certain PEDs and amounts taken vary bikini to wellness? And so the main thing that I commented on last time is yes, they definitely do vary, because I believe you can still turn pro in bikini naturally. it might take you much longer than others. But if you're okay with that, I think it still definitely can be accomplished. Wellness, that's not the case. The legs, the level of muscularity, it's not a natural division. You don't just see women walking up and down the beach like that without a lot of intentional effort and PEDs to support that muscularity. So the main difference that I usually see is, again, bikini athletes can be completely natural, amateurs and some pros. And so one thing is, outside of that, let's say you've got two just kind of maybe typical, like more typical protocols. What I would expect to see with a wellness athlete is you're more likely to see anabolic stacking. So when we talk about anabolics, the term is androgenic anabolic steroids, or AAS for short. So that's a term you might, or an acronym you might see used sometimes online, AAS. Those are the same things. If we talk about androgens or anabolics, somewhat interchangeable there in what we're actually referring to. So I see more anabolic stacking, meaning like, okay, maybe we're taking testosterone and stacking primo on top of that, maybe also throwing in a compound like Winstrol, Anavar, perhaps. There's literally so many things you can do, but I tend to see with wellness protocols that there's more anabolic stacking, probably more compounds, more heavy duty, more highly androgenic compounds than bikini competitors might use. However, there are rare exceptions too. There are bikini competitors that are taking really, really long lists of things as their stack. So it's going to vary a lot person to person, but typically the amount of gear used, probably the number of compounds used, is going to be higher in wellness. Probably the total dosage of everything will be higher. Yeah, the anabolics typically will be probably either just more present, either in multiple compounds, maybe with higher doses as well.
Yeah, and I feel like too, just looking at, say, Miss Bikini Olympia or Miss Wellness Olympia, obviously looking at the two structures, the muscle density, the muscle development, all of that, like you clearly have two very different structures, two very different criteria that you're trying to fill. So it's another thing to think about when deciding what division you're competing in. Like, not only is it genetics, which we have a whole episode on that, but it's what do you want your lifestyle to look like in and out of competing, right? And if you want to be successful in wellness, that is something that you're going to have to consider a factor, right? Whereas in bikini, it might be something to consider, but it's not as prominent or relevant than it would be in wellness.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So next question we have is, I took SARMs and now my hair and skin is suffering. So this is more of a statement than a question. Very, something very important to kind of highlight. This is kind of, the side effects of PEDs. And I feel like a lot of people just think of PEDs as some magic, right? Just some magic entity that they put in their body, and there only are positive things that come out of it, which is very much not the case. So
yeah, I think a lot of female competitors look at Anavar like a magic pill.
Yes, 100%. And even like when this question had come up before we recorded the last episode, I said to Laura, I was like, I don't even know what SARMs is. So I'm going to have Laura kind of explain that again.
Let's explain that, because I feel like SARMs had their heyday a few years ago, and I feel like now the community has kind of moved away from it, but it's still definitely relevant and worth touching on. So SARMs, that acronym, it stands for Selective Androgen Receptor Modulator. And when these were first discovered, the idea was that, okay, these are not going to create the same androgenic side effects as anabolics because of their interaction with the androgen receptors in the body. However, in practical cases, we don't first of all, we don't have a lot of research about SARMs, whereas anabolic steroids have been around for a long time. I touched on this last time and I did double check. So they've been around since about World War II era. I think they were originally developed by the Nazis. They were doing a lot of experiments trying to create super soldiers, etc. And so they've been around essentially since the 40s. And in the 60s, they became more and more popular. That's also when we have the birth of bodybuilding, et cetera. So keep in mind that things like Anavar, things like testosterone has been around the longest. These things have been studied for decades and decades in medical scientific literature. So we're very familiar with what the side effects are, what the risks are, what dosages are. SARMs, we don't really have that. they're technically not they're technically not for human use in the US. The way they are sold is for research purposes. And so what that means is like, let's say you're trying to do, I don't know, a nutrition, or scientific study with like some mice or some rats in a lab. You can legally buy them for research purposes. So that's how they're sold. However, they're not regulated the same way as pharmaceutical drugs in the US, there's a really high stringency with pharmaceutical drugs in the US, how they're to be manufactured, quality assurance, quality control, etc. SARMs fall under none of that. And so it's really a black box on what you're getting. They're typically made overseas in places like China, where they can be contaminated with not only other steroids. So you might think that, oh, I'm, as a woman, I'll take Osterin and it won't have the same side effects as Anavar. Well, it could be contaminated with other things, other compounds, Winstrol, D-bol, et cetera, that are more androgenic. And it could also be contaminated with heavy metals, things like mercury, lead, et cetera, which we don't want to be taking in anyways to our body. And sometimes too, if we're using any type of gear and it's like poor quality or it's fake, there's contaminants, that is really what can jack up people's skin and create a lot of acne too. That's a big one if you see, especially like, people with getting cystic acne. And then the other thing I was going to say on this too is that SARMs, so in the studies that we do have, and RP Strength also put out a video on their YouTube channel about 2 weeks ago. That's a pretty good overview. So if you're curious to learn more, I would definitely recommend checking that out. But essentially, you have to bring the dose higher to get the same response compared to something like Anavar, which would be kind of a more comparative one because Anavar is the least androgenic anabolic. So you have to take more to get the same result. And then at that point, the liver toxicity is a lot higher. So liver toxicity in SARMs has been shown to be as much as like 14 times what other anabolics like Anavar might be. So for what you're getting, the risk involved, it's not really worth it, which is why people tend to not use them anymore. Although I'm sure a lot of athletes still do, but you'd be much better off, especially when you could get Anavar via a prescription, you'd be much better off. Even honestly, as a woman, I think you'd be much better off using TRT, like a truly low dose TRT, than you would SARMs. And that's why I don't know, Sammy, have you ever heard of the term like SARMs goblins? Have you heard of that?
No.
No, I think I think it's used more with like men and like the gym culture and stuff, and it's because like these young guys who are like 17, 18, whatever, they can go get SARMs pretty easily and they're taking a lot of those versus like, and then they can say I'm not on steroids, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's one of those things. I think the community is kind of moving away from these compounds. And I think we realize that there are better options available based on risk, based on the perceived benefits, et cetera. So in my mind, I think this is something we're going to hear less and less about over time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Next question. That was a lot of great information. And I think you explained that really well too, that it was like very understanding. Cause I feel like that's another thing too, like where we seek out education on these things and it's not put in like a practical situation, right? It's just like all of the big science words. And like, I don't mean to say that to sound like uneducated, but it's like, you want something that you can read and understand and then formulate your own opinion on. And I know for me, if I see like a lot of big words and it's all just like heavily science-based, while yes, that's very important, it's good to have it in like a practical, like relevant terminology so it's easier to understand.
I'm glad, Sammy. And I think one thing too is we have a lot more info than we did when I started competing, but some of it, there is a long form content on YouTube you can find, but there's a lot of stuff on Instagram where it's like these 60-second reels where they say a bunch of like bullet points and it's, or like, or, oh, here's my cycle. What do you think? And it's like all of this quick info kind of just like
that's glorified
thrown at you. And you don't really have the full context. So it's like what we're trying to do today is more of a long form answer these questions in more than just a 30-second like reel or YouTube short or whatever.
Yeah.
So that way it is
absolutely.
easy to understand. Yeah. So the next one here is, and this is definitely a very relevant question. I definitely can relate to this one. Do all PEDs change your voice? I want results, but I fear this. So any androgenic PED, so any anabolic will change your voice with enough of a dose over a long enough duration. So whether it's testosterone, Anavar, primobolan, whatever, it will do it eventually. And this is something, I mean, even for myself, I do feel like my voice has probably deepened a little bit over time. And it's like, I don't know if it's a mix of age or some like light, cannabis use and whatnot. But it's a real thing. Sammy, I mean, you're seeing this and observing this, even as, you're a new athlete, relatively new pro, and you're seeing and observing this. And the reality is when you're growing your muscle tissues with anabolics, and that's what they're really good at. They really promote a high amount of recovery. So we can not only build more muscle tissue, we're stronger in the gym, etc. However, hypertrophy is a term that refers to maximum muscle growth. So while we're growing our muscles, our vocal cords are also experiencing this hypertrophy. Same thing, for example, with our heart, which is why many, say, male bodybuilders have passed away from heart attacks. It's because they get left ventricle thickening, and that can lead to heart attacks. So cardiac muscle, vocal cords, they all have androgen receptors all throughout our body. And most of them are in our legs or in our traps, but they're throughout our body. So the vocal cords are actually thickening and essentially getting more jacked. And I don't think there's a treatment for this. It's something that just depending on your use, frequency, dose, it can happen really fast if you take it as a woman. So again, there's different levels of androgens to all of these compounds. It's what's referred to as an androgen index. So Anavar is the lowest on that scale. However, the amount you're taking matters too. So even something like Anavar could do that. But let's say you go, and we hear this sometimes you hear of these like horror stories of bikini or wellness competitors like taking tren, or their coach tells them to take tren, or a really high dose of test or something. And like your voice can change like that. If you go for a really aggressive a compound right out of the gate, you don't even necessarily need to be taking it for that long for that to happen. So it's going to vary. I don't think it's reversible. The only solution I've heard of from this, I haven't tried it, although I would be curious maybe, is that what I have heard is the same way that trans women, when they're transitioning, and granted they are taking female hormones, some of them will get vocal coaches to learn to speak like a woman, right? If you're transitioning from a man to a woman, the female hormones will help, but also just learning to speak in a way, learning to use your vocal cords in a way where you can keep your pitch like up a little more and you're not like so deep in your throat, all that. That's the only thing I've ever heard of. Yeah, it's definitely a side effect I think a lot of women are afraid of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like too, like you had mentioned, like dose is going to be super important, and just understanding that as a woman, you do not need a lot. Like a lot is not required to achieve the goal that you're trying to achieve. So keeping that in mind. And then I think another thing too is like talking with the people around you, or like looking into past videos that you have of yourself. Or I know, Laura, you had mentioned like a voice tracking app is something that you can use
Yes, that
too.
too.
Like I know for me, like I just watch like old YouTube videos, and it's like to see, like to hear myself, to see if there's any like major difference, right? Or like I would literally ask my coach, because I don't see my coach all the time, literally asking him up front, like, hey, what do you think? Because I hear myself every day. My husband hears me every single day. So it's like kind of hard, obviously, when you're used to what you sound like, you don't really tell the difference day over day. So it's really just asking, like, maybe not asking all the people around you, but like, the
Yeah.
close people that kind of understand what's going on. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, you're good. There's ways around it or ways to track it, but it's definitely a very understanding concern, or like common concern to have too. But I feel like when you're conscious of it is when you can actually avoid it or track it to prevent it from happening. It's the people who don't care and just want the benefits of it that aren't going to do the tracking, the preventative maintenance, like things like that, to like really understand what's happening as it's happening.
Yeah. And I also think too, as an athlete, it's on you to at least do a very basic level of research about what you're taking. You should never take anything, especially like a performance enhancing drug, without knowing what it's for and what any potential risks are. It's like if you cannot do a basic Google search to understand, okay, here's the potential risks of like Anavar use, you shouldn't be taking it. You shouldn't be taking anything. So I think that that's something that definitely gets to me, is like, ladies, let's not be lazy. Like, let's not be dumb. Voice, how we look, as like And I mean, not how we look like. Do I look like a good bikini competitor? I mean, like literally looking like a woman, your potential fertility, like all of these things are on the line. And so if you are going to be so lazy or you're choosing to be so ignorant that you're not going to take care of your health, don't be surprised if you have consequences that you weren't anticipating. So let's not be dumb. Let's not be lazy. Be proactive. Be smart. This is your life. This is you. You are your own most precious resource. So
Yeah.
don't be unwise with these things. And you're right, Sammy. Like a vocal tracking app is a really easy one to use. I think I'm going to be doing that this year as I plan to compete next year. So we'll just see.
Yeah. And
The other
too, like
question,
remembering, sorry, before we move on, like remembering that these things are not reversible. Like, yeah, you can use a voice coach. So sorry, my door wasn't closed.
you're good.
Not like, yeah, you can use a voice coach, things like that. But there are some things that are not reversible. Like once you start to see virilization and your jawline is changing and your downstairs is changing and enlarging, like you can't go back from that.
Yeah.
So it's like
Yeah.
really understanding, like just because your coach prescribed you a cocktail of things or whoever you're speaking to suggested these things does not mean that you are only going to be successful if you take them or you're only going to see results if you take them. You really have to understand, like, how important is this sport to me? How important is my success in this sport to me? But most importantly, how important is your life to you and your long-term health? Like, yeah, competing is amazing. Don't get me wrong. It's changed my life in so many ways, but it's not important for me to put my life on the line and risk my health to be successful. Like, I want to be successful, don't get me wrong, but I want to also make sure that I live long. I want to make sure that I'm healthy for a very long period of time. So it's like really just understanding that competing is a hobby. It can become a career, it's a passion, it can be a lot of things, but understanding that it truly is just one piece of your life in a big picture of what your life is.
Mhm.
So remembering that when you make those decisions. And then you mentioned fertility, which is the next question, and I think this is a really big one too.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right, Sammy. A good way to think about PED use is like delay it as long as you can. Even if your goal is to turn pro and get to the top, try to start naturally. Whatever you build naturally, you're going to keep. Some of what we take, especially if it's something like Anavar, is just temporary fullness of the muscle. Not all of it is like permanent gains. So you want to wait as long as possible, and then less is more, because as soon as you kind of open this Pandora's box, there's only so much of these compounds as women we can take before we do have a more serious side effect to our health, to our femininity, and we can no longer continue using these things. So the sooner you open this Pandora's box, the sooner your competition career is also going to come to an end. So you have to kind of think of it that way. Less is more. Don't jump straight to high doses. At the low doses, like for example, Anavar is a common one that's talked about because it's a pill format, very easy for women to use. Something like that. You can start as low as like 2.5 milligrams or something, or 5 milligrams. You should not be jumping straight to, a 30 milligram, 25, 30 milligram cycle if you've never taken it before. If you've never taken it before, your body's actually going to get a lot of benefits at 2.5 or 5 milligrams in terms of muscle building. So you're going to miss out on all those gains if you jump straight from a low dose to a high dose. So that's why, again, like, doesn't seem like it, but with certain things, like less is more, right? It's not always more is more.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And as far as fertility to that one, Sammy, and I know this is like a topic that is also something we've talked about as a goal of yours and like a really important thing for you and your husband coming up. It's important to keep your hormones in a good place, because if we're in a low estrogen state for a prolonged period of time, meaning like stage lean, doing lots of shows, or just having suppressed hormones, which typically does come for all of us in competition prep, most of us cannot avoid that. If we're in a low estrogen environment for a long time, it does degrade the uterine lining. If you also have, say, like low progesterone, and again, remember all of our hormones, testosterone, progesterone, estrogen, FSH, LH, et cetera, all of these are going to be suppressed during a big calorie deficit. So progesterone as well, if you're too low in progesterone, it's going to also make it hard to retain a pregnancy, right? So you might be able to get pregnant, but you may not retain it if you don't have sufficient progesterone to support that pregnancy. The other thing too that I think some women don't realize is as women, we have the eggs we have. We were born with the eggs that we have, and that's it for our life. And that's why women, we have different concerns in a different way we have to think about fertility than men do. Men are constantly producing sperm, and while there are consequences if the father is on the older side too, for women, we have the eggs we have. And if you're taking a lot of compounds, a lot of PEDs, they can degrade your egg quality, just like other lifestyle factors, right? Like if you're drinking a lot of alcohol, if you're smoking, if you're eating unhealthy food, if you're going to the tanning bed a lot, like things like that can also degrade the quality of your eggs. So really, it's important to live a healthy lifestyle. Keep this in mind. And it's really important whether you're natural or enhanced. And if your goal is to have kids in the future, especially short-term future, that you need to be doing lab work all the time, like in between prep and off season, maybe throughout preps or throughout off seasons as needed as well, especially if there are any imbalances there. But that's really important. And I'm glad, I think one of the biggest things that I'm very grateful for is I'm glad that along the way I've had good mentors that gave me good advice, that didn't encourage me to do anything overly risky, that pointed me in the direction of really, I've got a really, really good doctor here in Orange County that they used to work with the Olympic athletes and things like that. And they've given me a lot of really great advice. They work with a lot of pro athletes, a lot of pro bodybuilders. So I'm very grateful that I've had good resources, but you have to be smart and you have to really educate yourself. You cannot rely, even if you have an amazing coach. As coaches, we should be informing you, but ultimately you also need to do the research yourself. Like I'm a little bit of a stickler sometimes, but it's like, if I can tell that, someone's asking for something and they haven't even Googled what it is or what it can do, I'm like, absolutely not. Like we're not, you need to understand what this is too. I can explain to you, but you need to be proactive and look this up yourself and take care of yourself.
Yeah.
So,
and I think too that a lot of the time, maybe not necessarily a lot of the times, but there can be cases where a coach is going to say, hey, this PED is really going to help you be successful in this sport. And the coach, granted, this is probably a big red flag, obviously, but they only care about your success in the sport because your success is their success. If you succeed in the sport, it makes them look like a good coach. They're only concerned about your success in the sport and not your success in life after the sport. So they're going to push these compounds and they're going to push all of these things for you to be successful so that it looks good for them without keeping your fertility and things like that in check, especially if you don't tell them that fertility or family is important to you post competing or even between seasons, right? Like, so for me, I knew from the beginning that fertility and becoming a mother and having a family was important to me from the beginning. So I made that very clear with my coach so that when and if we did decide to implement a PED, that the dosage was proper. We were going on and off cycle at proper times. We were making sure blood work was getting taken before and after every prep, things like that. So it's like, knowing that that is important to you and expressing that to your coach is super important, because your coach doesn't know you want a family unless you tell them. Otherwise, they just think you want to succeed in the sport and they're going to do what it takes to help you succeed. And then two, another thing that we talk about a lot is at 22 or 23 or even younger, right, when you're entering into the sport, what your goals are in terms of family and reproduction and fertility might not be the same as it's going to be in 5 or 10 years. So say you're entering the sport, you're 20 years old, you're like, I don't like kids. Like, I don't want kids. That's not for me. You start competing, you start taking these PEDs, you get successful in the sport, you turn pro, you go to Olympia, and then you meet somebody. You meet somebody, and now you want children. And your thought process changes. And now you want a family. Well, for the last 10 years, you've been pretty much on cycle for the whole 10 years. Well, what's your fertility even look like now? What does that look like? How much harder is it going to be for you, if at all possible, to have children because you put competing in the forefront and didn't consider fertility, but now that you've met someone, it's important to you. And I think that goes for more than just fertility as well, in terms of like virilization. Like, what is your appearance like now that you've put PEDs in the forefront of your life? How much virilization do you have? What does your voice sound like? Do you still have these feminine
Yeah.
qualities that are going, and I'm not saying that looks are the only thing that people go for, but let's be real here and let not sugarcoat it. You look at someone first and then you get to know them, right? Physical attraction is always going to be a
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, Sammy,
So,
if we're talking, especially too, if we're talking heterosexual relationships, men are visual creatures. So if we're talking,
yeah.
we're mostly talking to an audience of, say, female athletes, men are visual creatures. And some will, especially maybe those in bodybuilding might be accepting of any side effects you have. But yeah, especially if you visibly look masculinized, fertility aside, it might be harder to find a partner that wants to settle down and have a family with you, right? Like
Hmm.
just that alone. Like let's be real. And that's why as women, it's a different scenario for us. That's just the reality. It's a different scenario for us taking these things than it is for men. And that's because and actually I want to take a step back because I feel like we missed this with the voice question. Men have less risks than we do. We only have, or they only have the health risks, right? Heart health,
Hmm.
kidney health, high blood pressure, things like that. For women, we have all of those risks still. And then we have all of the side effects to our femininity because these androgenic compounds, men already have them in much, much higher
Yeah.
concentrations than we do. So they're just taking things that make them more of a man. Well, for us, it's like the more anabolics you take, the more you are stepping yourself towards a gender transition. So at some point, fertility or your visible beauty is going to start to change in a way that, yes, could affect your potential future to have a family. So I think you have to be really smart and really clear with yourself, like you said, Sammy, and decide like, what does this sport mean to me? How important is this? How big of a role in my life is this going to play? And those are big
Yeah.
questions, and you might not figure that out initially. So that's why it is good to come into this if you're new and just like be natural or, just go slow, see how you feel with it. And then the just little side tangent I wanted to make is not all PEDs are androgenic. So for example, things like fat burners, growth hormone, et cetera, these are not androgenic PEDs, but they do give a benefit of either more rapid fat loss or a little bit better strength and recovery. So yes, not every PED will change your voice, but those have other side effects, right? We take too many fat burners, too many stimulants, the risk is going to be heart attack, stroke, et cetera, stress to the kidneys. If we're taking something like growth hormone, your risk is going to be, some type of cancer growth. You could get things like carpal tunnel, et cetera. So there's no free lunch. There's no magic pill.
Yeah.
There's nothing that gives us all the benefits we want with zero side effects. That's not how these things work. So yeah, I think the fertility question, Sammy, it's such a big part of a woman's life that I think it's just, you got to, like you said, you got to be smart. At 20, you're probably going to feel a lot different about life than you might at, 28 or 30.
Yeah. And I think that goes too for, like, we kind of mentioned people who aren't in a relationship. I mean, same goes for people who are in a relationship, and understanding that the decisions that you're making as an individual are going to affect you as a couple. So, again, while bodybuilding is a very selfish sport and very self centered in the moment, you have to understand that the choices that you're making as an individual, if you are in a relationship or married, whatever the case may be, is also going to affect your partner. And again, if your partner is in the bodybuilding industry, maybe it doesn't affect them as much, but still, say you're taking a couple years to compete and then now you're done competing and you're like, I want kids. It's going to be the same scenario. So I do think it's important to, not only for the health risks, for your partner to know what you're taking. God forbid something happens, right? It's important to share these things, but also
Yeah.
for the health impacts that it's going to have long term in terms of fertility. So it's really good to be transparent on, those decisions and making the decisions together. I know for me, when it came time to make the decision, it wasn't just me making the decision, it was me and my husband making the decision, because again, the choices impact both of us, and that was important to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. These are, yeah, these are big, these are kind of, heavier topics. I think this would be a good one to have with Dr. Singler on maybe sometime in the future. So a couple questions that we can sort of group together about just sort of like the use of these things. So one of the questions we had, which actually came from one of my clients, is like who, hasn't even prepped before or anything. She's in a kind of initial phase. She was asking like who helps competitors with that? Is it their coach? Where do people get things? And then we also had a question about what percentage of bikini girls take PEDs. So something like this is just going to be that question is just complete speculation. I would speculate that across the US, probably less than half. I would say less than half use. And then probably here in California, where we do have a bit more of a community, it is a little bit more of a thing. It's a little more intense. I would guess maybe about half, roughly, something like that. What would you say, Sammy?
What did we say last time? Like 70-30 or 60-40?
Yeah,
here in California. In California.
Here, yeah, right here in Southern California.
I would say in Southern California, it's probably like a 60-40. 60 doesn't, 40 does.
Okay.
Or like 70-30, like 70 doesn't, 30 does. And that's in California. I would agree that it's about 50-50 for like the US as a whole. But I would say California
I would say less than 50%. US as a whole, because I think the more rural areas
for the US.
Yeah, maybe. I have no idea, but like more rural areas and stuff. To me, at least, when I see the athletes and the competitors at these shows, like to me, they look a lot more natural. And it's just not if you're like, I'm from Indiana, like bodybuilding is not as much of a thing there. It's a huge thing here. So that, as far as where people are getting things and who's guiding them, yes, your coach would give you direction and guidance on these things, but I think it's always best to also be working with a doctor that will guide you. And there are primary care physicians, even or OBs or endocrinologists who will weigh in on this. I would say more often nowadays, people will go to hormone clinics, like a wellness clinic, where they specialize in something like HRT, where they are legally prescribing something like, for example, TRT to men or women, and something like that. It's a prescription, it's a medication. And just because you're taking that and it has performance enhancing benefits doesn't mean that it's like a cycle. So as a woman or a man, if you're going and you're literally just getting hormone replacement, like you don't have enough of the typical amount of testosterone or progesterone or whatever to just have good quality life, feel good day to day, replacing those levels is not the same thing as running a cycle, say, of testosterone. So as a woman, like TRT is going to be somewhere around maybe like 2 to 5 milligrams a week. A cycle is when we're in that territory of like, 20 milligrams a week. And I will see clinics prescribe that. So you also need to be thoughtful about which clinics you're choosing, which is hard to do, but that's where a coach can also kind of point you in the right direction. A coach should probably have a network of clinics or providers that they work with and that they have experience with, that they trust. So that's kind of the main way people will go about this. And like, yes, you can get stuff from a gym bro or that person who sells steroids at your gym, but like, is that really the best approach? Probably not. Is it riskier? Yeah, for sure. So,
or just because your boyfriend knows somebody,
or you get ripped off. I had clients this year where they kind of wanted to go that route. Oh yeah, I got this from my boyfriend's friend. He's the one that sells everything at the gym. And then what they got was fake. And it's like, okay, well, are you gonna, now you just waste all that money. You're going to go hit him up to get your money back? Probably not. But now you actually got to go to a doctor and get like what you wanted to be a little bit cheap on.
Yeah.
So,
and I feel like that you had mentioned like hormone replacement therapy, things like that. I think that kind of ties into the next question too. And this is a question that I see a lot of people have is, I'm going to kind of make this into two things. Am I still natural, or am I still considered natural and can do a natural show if I'm on hormone replacement therapy or if my PED is prescribed?
Yeah. That question was a joke. Yeah. So we got to.
I have had some people ask that. So like I'm part of a Facebook group, and a lot of people, because hormone replacement therapy is super popular in women nowadays because of low estrogen, progesterone, things like that. So there has been a huge spike in masters competitors as well, that being more prominent. And a lot of those women want to do natural shows, things like that. But sadly, they cannot.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Sammy. That is a valid question. The person that asked this one, just because I remembered who it was, it's a friend of mine, asked, can I still compete in a natural show if my Anavar and TRT is prescribed? So she was being facetious when she asked that, but she's doing that because Yeah, there are people that will ask this or think that, oh, I'm getting my TRT from a doctor, so I'm still natural. No, you're not still natural, sweetheart. Like it's okay. It's a medication. You're not blasting off on a cycle, but testosterone is a performance enhancer. It's, it's one of those substances like progesterone, estrogen. Those are probably fine because those aren't performance enhancing. Those are not going to make you grow huge muscles in a very short time span. So for natural shows, like natural federations, just let them be natural. If you have hormone replacement therapy, okay, cool. Just compete in the NPC. The shows are, amazingly well produced. You're going to have a lot of good quality athletes. You're going to have people that are completely natural, some that are not. And I always say it's just best off to do those because I also think the experience is best. Natural shows tend to be super small. So like if you go in, let's say that's you, where you've got prescribed TRT or something, you go into a natural show and you have 3 women in the whole bikini group that you're in the whole division, and you win first place. Does that really feel like a win because you beat 3 people when you know in your heart that you're taking testosterone and they're probably not? Like, first of all, the number of competitors is super small. So it's like, are we just trying to get a participation trophy here?
Yeah.
And
It's like
then
by default,
to
you won.
try to like skirt around the rules. It's like just like do a show with everyone else and see how you do. That's what being competitive is. Like it's not a good competitors want to win when the best people are competing alongside them.
Yeah. It's like doing a race with someone that has a broken foot. It's like, did you really win, or like
Yeah. Yeah. Or you just
was it
kind of
by
gaming the
yeah.
system. So that's my thought on it. Just let the natural federations be natural.
Yeah. And I remember mentioning this in the last time we recorded it. The natural federations are actually cracking down on that more, doing like polygraph tests and urine samples too. So they just started the day before, they'll do a polygraph test. And instead of doing the urine sample the day before the show, if you win, or like your top, I think it's if you win, because Paul was just talking about this the other day. They will immediately, after you win, straight from stage, escort you to the restroom to take a urine sample. And that gives you no time to falsify your test or anything like that. So they've definitely been cracking down on that a little bit more as well, which is nice because then it does give the people who are 100% natural more of an advantage, or fair advantage, I should say. It just really keeps the federation, the natural federation, natural, right? Which
Yes and no. Yes and no. Tyler, you're right. Tyler Mannion actually just came out with some announcements about this, I think a day or two ago. So think of it this way, Sammy. The polygraph tests are not admissible in court.
okay.
Polygraph tests, the way they work, they go off of your heart rate and your blood pressure. So if you can control your heart rate and your blood pressure, you can pass a polygraph, even if you've, committed a crime, run some gear, anything that would happen in court, right? And you can take, for example, a beta blocker to keep your heart rate lower and pass a polygraph. The other thing too is some of these compounds, like I don't believe that the way the testosterone cream, if you're taking a testosterone cream, I don't believe that shows up in a urine sample, for example. So you'd have to be taking like, diazide or something a bit more extreme, like a diuretic, for anything to show up in your urine. If you were taking a cycle, cycles of certain things, you would need to have enough time. But I think Sammy, people that are going to say win a natural pro show or even a amateur natural show, like a big one, like the Ben Weider, if they're trying to game the system, they're going to be people that are sophisticated enough to do
ways.
so. Yeah. Because it's very easy. It's not hard to do. And so that's why people look at some of these shows. We don't necessarily talk about it. And we're like, is it really? Like,
Are you sure about that?
Yeah. Yeah. Those are some really intense shoulder caps. Okay.
Yeah. So it's just, again, it's just being true to yourself and really knowing, like, did I actually do what I was supposed to do and give myself a fair advantage? So it's almost like more like a moral thing, really.
I think it's a moral thing. And my perspective is like, it's like NPC, IFBB, they can test. They don't. They are testing the natural shows. So just if you're in that mindset of like, okay, I'm going to do whatever it takes, like do those federations anyway. The NPC, the IFBB are the biggest federations. I think they have the best, the best shows because I think they're the best experience. You've got the best, group of athletes. and things like that. So it's like, just, I think even for my natural athletes, I put almost all my clients are natural. And so I put them in NPC shows too. It's like, I don't think there's any point, especially if you're in bikini. Okay, maybe different if you're wellness or something like that, or figure. But for bikini, I think just stick with the NPC. You know, there was a question as well in here that I think we can just like kind of lightly touch on, because I don't want to, um, you know, but I mean, most of us pros, they sort of directly asked if Sammy and I are natural. Most pros, the vast majority of pros are not natural. People that turn pro maybe 2017, 2016 and before, sure. Yeah, they very easily could have turned pro natural. And I think if we look at even the Bikini Olympia winners from like 2016 and prior, I think to me, they look pretty natural. So the division's evolved a lot. It's constantly evolving. And I still think it's possible to turn pro naturally, but it's going to take more years. And I think nowadays people they just want to get it done. They see other people winning their pro cards in a year and they want to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, do I consider myself natural? No, I haven't been on a cycle this whole year. I've just been taking my like low dose TRT, but you know that it is part of the sport. And I think the biggest thing that I learned is you have to decide for yourself what you're okay with as a woman. Like there are a lot of choices and questions that I've had to think through that I never thought I would have to when I first started. And it's been pretty shocking, some of the like things I've had to think through or choices I feel like I've had to make in hindsight. But you know, I think you just need to know yourself. You need to know what you're good with and what you're not, and think long term with any choices that you're making.
100%. One of the questions is if you could go back, would you still follow the same path that you followed before? And for myself, I mean, I kind of touched on this before. Like every decision I made, I did my own research. I discussed it with my husband. So it's like, again, why are you doing what you're doing? Have you absolutely maximized your potential? Is everything that you're doing 100%? Is your training 100% naturally? Is your nutrition 100% naturally? How long have you been training? Have you even fulfilled your newbie gains to the highest maximum potential that you possibly could have? Like, have you weighed out every single option, what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how you're doing it? Or are you looking for a quick fix, instant gratification? Like if you are just trying to hit the ground running, turn pro in a year, and say you did it, you're not doing it for the right reason in terms of taking PEDs, right? So it really just looking over everything A to Z and why you're doing what you're doing. And honestly, like, why would you want to regret that type of decision? A decision that affects your health and your longevity of life.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of things you can regret in life, but like your health is one thing that you shouldn't second guess.
Yeah, I mean, they say health is wealth, and I think when we do get sick or, you know, we're not feeling our best or we get injured or something, that's when we realize how important it is. And I would say for myself, I would still follow the path that I had. For me, I'm just glad I had really good mentors and people giving me good advice from the get-go. If I didn't, I probably could have ended up in a very different spot in life. So everything for me has worked out the way I've wanted to. Like all the goals that I've had in life that I've actually worked for, I've achieved all of them. Like for me, I look at it, I'm like, I'm this Midwest girl who wanted to be here, wanted to make her life here. I started in engineering, completely different field. I created a job and a career that I love, and it's still going. I'm not done yet. There's more goals. There's more things I'm going to do and accomplish. So for me, I'm glad that things worked out the way they did. But with different advice or guidance, who knows? It's like it could have been a different story. So that's where it's important to also like do your own research. Like when I was starting to consider like, okay, should I ever try Anavar? I was researching it, like looking up what it does, what's a safe dosage, what's not a safe dosage for a woman, what do you need to look out for? Okay, let me talk to a doctor about this. Let me get lab work. So you want to just make sure that you're doing everything with a very long-term vision in mind, not just this prep, not just this national show for my pro card right now, but like your whole life, your whole future.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And again, too, it's like we are thankful for really good mentors, but there are people out there that don't think about your health and wellness. And one thing, this is like kind of off topic because it's not a PED, but it is part of like a protocol that a lot of people don't understand, would be a diuretic as well. So like, again, while that's not a performance enhancer, it is something that's utilized. So like a
No, it
fat
is,
burner
Sammy, it
or
is. Diuretics
yeah.
are PEDs.
So it's like those protocols as well, question those, because I've had clients, one very specific, had a coach having her take 6 to 7 expel a day and depleting water. And she was getting sick. Obviously, she was severely dehydrated. So it's like
Yeah.
question everything.
Yeah.
Whether you're paying them, right? Like
Yeah.
they're not paying you. Question absolutely everything, regardless of if they're a coach, if they have certifications, if they have degrees, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Just because they are educated and qualified does not mean that the decisions or the protocols that they're assigning to you are the right decisions and
Yeah.
choices, and have
Yeah.
your health in mind.
Yeah. That scenario, depending on her water, might have been fine. If she was, because one serving of Expel is 4 pills, but if she wasn't drinking any water, like that's very unsafe, right? We
Mhm.
shouldn't be drinking no water going into a show.
Yeah.
When you said diuretics at first, I was thinking like Diazide and Aldactone are the more common ones that are used. Those are prescription diuretics. So we have like water pills, we have the prescription diuretics, and yeah, even though those don't seem like it, especially I would consider something like Diazide, Aldactone a PED, because it's going to give you an advantage in terms of how you look on stage that day.
Mhm.
For especially the bigger, more muscular divisions, they're going to really highly use those to bring in their final look for show day. So I feel like we covered a lot this episode, Sammy, and I'm
Yeah.
really crossing my fingers that our audio and video came out perfectly. So with that all said, let's go ahead and wrap it up here. We want to thank you guys so much for listening. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe, and share with a friend, whether you're listening on YouTube or on an audio platform. We appreciate you guys so much, and sharing is how the podcast will grow so we can bring you even more amazing episodes and guests. So have a great rest of your week, and we'll catch you in the next episode.